My name is Anna Torres. I'm 33, a senior analyst at one of the top consulting firms in Chicago. I work 70-hour weeks, manage million-dollar portfolios, and still remember to send birthday cards on time. I've never missed a Sunday dinner with my family in 12 years. Not once. Not when I was pulling double shifts during tax season. Not when I had the flu so bad I could barely stand. My mother always called me the dependable one, the daughter who showed up with a hot casserole and a warm smile. But that Sunday, everything I believed about love, family, and loyalty shattered the moment I stepped onto their porch. I never missed Sunday dinner. Not once in 12 years. Even on weeks when I clocked in 70 hours and my eyes burned from spreadsheet lines dancing across glowing screens. Even during tax season when my office smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase markers, and I came home so late I barely remembered the drive. Even that winter, I caught the flu so vicious I could barely stand upright in the shower. I still showed up pale, sweating through my coat, holding a Tupperware of homemade chicken soup I'd forced myself to make between fever naps because Mom always said store-bought was too salty. My mother, Veronica, loved to tell people I was the dependable one. Her voice would swell with a certain pride whenever she said it. Anna's our steady girl. She'd beam to friends at church potlucks, to cashiers at the grocery store, to the mailman when he delivered packages. She never forgets a birthday, always remembers anniversaries, always shows up. She made it sound like an innate virtue, something I was born with like straight teeth or a well-behaved temperament. But it wasn't virtue. It was choice. 100 little choices day after day to keep showing up no matter how tired or hurt or empty I felt. Because I believed deep down in a place I never let anyone touch that if I kept showing up, they'd never have reason to stop loving me. That evening, the sun was dipping below the highway sound barriers as I drove the 40 minutes to their house lasagna dish hot on the seat beside me. I'd made it from scratch, layering pasta sheets, slow-cooked tomato sauce, mozzarella parmesan, all the things Dad Mark liked. He hated ricotta, said it felt like wet sand in his mouth. I'd learned to adjust. That was another thing about being the dependable one. You remembered everyone's preferences, so they never felt unseen. The smell of garlic and basil filled the car like a memory. When I was little, Mom would fry garlic in olive oil to start her red sauce, and the scent would drift down the hall to my bedroom. It always meant safety. It meant I could stop worrying for a while because dinner was coming, warmth was coming, love was coming. Even as an adult, that smell still wrapped around me like a blanket. Driving through dusk traffic, I breathed it in and let it soothe the tight place between my ribs. Their porch light was already on when I pulled up, casting a pale yellow glow across the front steps. The kind of glow that made it look like someone was waiting just for you. I parked out front, careful not to block Ethan's driveway spot. He was my older brother, the golden one, the star they bragged about to everyone. His spot was always the closest to the house. Mine was usually down the block, but that night I'd gotten lucky. I sat in the car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, lasagna balanced on my lap. The Pyrex dish was so hot it burned through the folded towel I'd wrapped around it. I didn't mind. Pain in small doses made me feel awake. Through the windshield, I could see the front windows lit up shapes moving behind sheer curtains. For a moment, a flicker of childlike excitement passed through me. I pictured Dad's grin when he saw the lasagna mom's tired smile softening at the sight of me, Ethan teasing me about my cooking before eating half the pan. I wanted it to be a good night. I needed it to be a good night. Because for 12 years, no matter what else fell apart, bad dates, layoffs, rent, hikes, friendships that eroded in silence. Sunday dinner was the one thing that stayed. The ritual that anchored my week, that told me I still belong somewhere. I didn't know sitting there in the fading summer light with basil-scented steam curling around my fingers, That this would be the last Sunday dinner I'd ever make the drive for. That in a few short minutes, everything I believed about love family and what it meant to be the dependable one would fracture under the weight of a single overheard conversation. I only knew that I was tired but proud. Because no matter what else I failed at, no matter who else left, I always showed up. I turned off the ignition and sat there listening to the soft tick of the cooling engine, the faint hum of cicadas rising from the trees along their street. The lasagna dish burned warm against my thighs through the towel, a grounding heat that reminded me to keep breathing. I glanced up at the house at the porch, light glowing buttery yellow against the falling dusk. Their porch light had always been like that. Even when I was a teenager sneaking in past curfew, it felt less like a reprimand and more like a silent message. We're still here. You're still welcome. I remember once sophomore year of college driving home in the middle of the night after my boyfriend dumped me over the phone. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I just drove the 2 hours in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles cramped. When I pulled up at 3 a.m., the porch light was on. Mom said she'd forgotten to turn it off, but part of me believed she left it burning for me anyway. I'd climbed those same front steps, then wiping tears off my cheeks and felt the light wrap around me like arms. That night, 12 years later, I climbed those steps again with the lasagna balanced carefully in my hands. Left right pause on the third step because it creaked. It always creaked. When we were kids, Ethan and I used to skip the third step on purpose so Dad wouldn't hear us sneaking back in after curfew. Ethan always thought it was hilarious how I'd hold my breath like a burglar in my own home. Ethan. His car was parked in the driveway, shining under the porch light. He'd gotten a new SUV, black with tinted windows and spotless rims. I remembered when he drove a rusted Toyota Corolla that smelled like gym socks and cheap cologne back in high school when he was the golden boy quarterback, when he used to ruffle my hair and call me squirt, even though I hated it. I balanced the lasagna on one hip and reached for the screen door. My reflection flickered in the glass, tired eyes, hair tied back in a low bun, lips chapped from too much office heat and not enough sleep. For a moment, I thought about smoothing my hair down, wiping the mascara smudge from under my left eye. But what did it matter? They didn't care how I looked. They just cared that I showed up. Because that was my role. The dependable daughter, the one who remembered Dad. Mark hated mushrooms. Mom Veronica loved lemon cake with extra zest. Ethan couldn't stand any dessert with coconut. The one who memorized their prescriptions in case of emergencies, who called every birthday at 7 a.m. before work meetings, who texted reminders about anniversaries and dentist appointments. The one who knew their lives down to the smallest details, while they knew almost nothing about mine. They didn't know I cried in the bathroom at work last week after my boss praised a male analyst for an idea I'd pitched 2 days earlier. They didn't know I woke up each morning with a pit of dread in my chest, thinking of emails and performance reviews and deadlines that never stopped coming. They didn't know I sometimes sat on my apartment floor at midnight eating leftover takeout straight from the container because I was too exhausted to stand at the stove. But they didn't need to know any of that. All they needed was for me to keep showing up with hot lasagna, with birthday gifts mailed on time, with a smile that said, "Yes, I can handle it all. Yes, I am fine." I adjusted my grip on the dish, feeling its weight pull down my shoulders. Inside, I heard laughter, Ethan's loud bark of a laugh, Dad's deep chuckle, Mom's quiet voice floating underneath. It sounded warm, familiar, like home. I didn't know that just beyond that door waited the truth that would unravel every belief I'd clung to about who I was to them. I didn't know that everything I thought I was building, every dinner, every birthday, remembered, every lasagna baked, was nothing but scaffolding around a hollow center. All I knew was that it was Sunday. I had lasagna in my hands, and like every Sunday before, I was about to walk into the house believing that bringing food was the same as bringing love. I shifted the lasagna dish in my hands, feeling the heat seep through the towel and into my palms, grounding me. I was just about to pull open the screen door when I heard my name. My breath caught suspended somewhere between ribs and throat. "Anna won't be a problem," Dad's voice said, flat and certain. "She never says no to family." I froze, hand hovering inches from the handle. The metal screen pressed cool against my arm. Inside, the voices bounced off the kitchen tiles, too clear, too sharp. "She's making good money now, right?" Ethan said. His voice had that familiar edge of impatience, like he was already bored with the conversation. "Senior analyst at that consulting firm. Has to be over 200 grand by now." "Probably more with bonuses," Dad said, as if discussing the price of a used car. "Remember last year she covered the property tax when we fell short?" "Didn't even blink." Mom's voice came next, thin and strained. "But 500,000, Ethan. That's insane. How did you even—" "It doesn't matter how Ethan snapped. What matters is I need it handled before the IRS audit goes deeper. You said you'd help." Silence. I could almost see them standing in the kitchen with its outdated oak cabinets and flickering fluorescent light. Mom wringing her hands, Dad leaning against the counter, arms crossed, Ethan pacing like he always did when he was cornered. Finally, Dad spoke, calm and resolved. "We will help. Anna's got the money. She always comes through." The lasagna dish didn't shift in my grip, but something inside me did. A crack, a hairline fracture spreading across everything I thought I knew. Ethan let out a dry laugh. "She still thinks we're a real family. It's almost sad." "Don't talk about your sister like that," Mom said quietly, her voice brittle. "She's naive, Mom. She thinks showing up with a damn lasagna means something." My throat tightened, a bitter taste rising at the back of my mouth. My ears rang with the pounding of my pulse. I didn't move, didn't blink. I stood there, trapped between the person I'd always been, the daughter with lasagna in her hands, hope in her chest, and the person I was becoming in real time, piece by jagged piece. Dad spoke again, his tone as final as a gavel. "We'll space out the requests. Anna can't say no when you cry. That always works. I don't like lying to her." Mom whispered so soft I almost missed it. "It's not lying," Ethan said sharply. "It's family. Her money is family money. She doesn't have kids, doesn't have a husband. What's she spending it on anyway?" I felt something shift in my chest, a slow, grinding movement, like tectonic plates tearing away from each other. The lasagna dish was growing heavy in my grip, its heat leaching away with every second I stood there. My apartment. That's what I spent it on. My apartment with its worn hardwood floors and secondhand bookshelves and big windows that let the morning sun spill across my bed like gold. My apartment, the only place in the world that felt like it belonged solely to me. "She'll be fine," Dad said. His voice was calm, dismissive, done with the topic. "She always handles things. That's what she does." I heard Mom sniffle then, her voice cracked. "Are you sure there's no other way?" Ethan's voice dropped low and cold. "Unless you want me in federal prison for tax evasion and fraud." "No, this is it. My lawyer says if I pay it before they dig deeper, they'll drop it to civil penalties. Tax evasion, fraud, federal prison. Words that felt too big to fit inside the quiet kitchen I'd grown up in. Words that cracked open a truth I hadn't let myself see. My brother, the golden boy they bragged about to neighbors and cousins and strangers in checkout lines, wasn't just struggling. He was criminal, and they were going to make me pay for it. I stepped back from the door slowly, careful not to let the third step creak. My palms were slick with sweat, the towel slipping against the glass dish. I clutched it tighter, desperate not to make a sound, not to let them know I'd heard, because I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet, not like this. I made it back to my car without falling apart. That surprised me. My legs felt disconnected, like I was floating just above the pavement. The lasagna sat on my lap like a joke I didn't get anymore. I didn't drive off right away. I just sat there engine off, staring at their porch light, that pale, warm glow I'd always thought meant welcome. Now it just felt like an interrogation lamp exposing everything I'd been too blind to see. I thought I was bringing them dinner. Turns out I was just bringing them another way to drain me dry. I sat in my parked car, staring out at the empty grocery store lot, the lasagna dish cooling beside me like a dying ember. I could still hear their voices, each sentence branding itself into my chest with a heat sharper than the Pyrex dish had ever been. $500,000. Anna won't be a problem. She always gives. She still thinks we're a real family. It's almost sad. The words looped in my mind like a prayer in reverse. I replayed Mom's voice, brittle breaking, as she asked Ethan if there was any other way. I'd always thought her love for me was unconditional, but now I heard it for what it was. Fear. Fear of losing Ethan. Fear of what his prison sentence would mean for her illusions of motherhood success. Fear of a son exposed as criminal, a family, reputation in tatters. I wasn't the daughter she worried about. I was the solution. Dad's tone cut through me hardest, so calm, so certain, as if the choice was obvious, as if sacrificing my savings, my future, my independence was nothing compared to keeping Ethan out of prison. As if I existed to absorb the damage they couldn't bear to let touch him, and Ethan, God, Ethan. I thought about the way he used to tuck me under his arm in high school hallways, calling me squirt while ruffling my hair, thinking it was funny when I scowled and fixed my bangs again. I thought about his graduation speech, how he'd thanked Mom and Dad for every sacrifice, and then turned to wink at me in the front row like we shared some private joke. I'd clapped until my hands stung that day. I'd been so proud of him. Now his voice echoed in my head. She doesn't have kids, doesn't have a husband. What's she spending it on anyway? My chest tightened. I wanted to scream at the memory of it, at his arrogance, his entitlement, his certainty that my life only mattered in relation to theirs. But the scream stayed trapped under my ribs, a silent, pulsing ache. I thought about my apartment, the tiny one-bedroom I'd saved for years to afford, with secondhand furniture I'd refinished myself and bookshelves lined with novels I'd carried from city to city. The place where every Friday night I lit a cheap vanilla candle and curled up under a weighted blanket, reading until sleep pulled me under. The only place in the world where I felt safe enough to breathe all the way down to my belly. What would happen if I gave them what they wanted? If I wrote a check for $500,000 to erase Ethan's crimes, would they thank me even then? Or would they nod like it was expected, then ask for more next time? And there would be a next time. Because once people know you're willing to set yourself on fire to keep them warm, they will keep handing you matches. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, vibrating against the plastic. Mom's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. The thought of hearing her voice, soft, pleading, weaponized by guilt, made my stomach twist. I imagined myself walking back up those steps, lasagna dish in hand, smile fixed in place, and stepping into that kitchen. I imagined Ethan hugging me too tightly, Dad clapping my shoulder like I was his favorite employee, Mom kissing my cheek with watery eyes. I imagined them sitting down to dinner, serving up lasagna, while discussing how best to siphon my life into theirs without making me suspicious again. Something inside me went cold and still at that image. A part of me died right there in that grocery store parking lot. The part that believed love meant sacrificing yourself until there was nothing left. The part that believed family meant I owed them every piece of me they asked for. I stared at the flickering fluorescent light above the pharmacy entrance. It buzzed in the quiet night moths, battering themselves against its glow. I wondered if they knew it wasn't the moon. If they ever realized the thing drawing them in would burn them to death. I think that was the moment I realized they were never going to stop asking, and I was the only one who could decide if I'd keep saying yes. I didn't feel anger yet, just a clarity so sharp it hurt to hold inside my chest. I wasn't ready to confront them. Not tonight. Not like this. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out who I was without their hands in my pockets, their voices in my head, their needs drowning out my own. I reached over and touched the lasagna dish. It had gone cold. I pressed my palm flat against the glass, feeling its smooth hardness beneath my fingers. Then I turned the key in the ignition and drove away, the empty streets unfolding before me in quiet darkness, promising nothing except escape. I drove with no destination in mind, just miles of blacktop unfolding beneath my headlights, city lights smearing past my windows like tears I refused to shed. The lasagna dish sat on the passenger seat, its smell of garlic and basil growing stale heavy, like grief. At a red light, I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. My hands were trembling, not with rage, not with sadness, with realization. For so long, I thought I was the generous one, the dependable daughter, the sister who never hesitated to reach into her pocket, who showed up with gifts and food and money, believing that's what love looked like. Believing that if I kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit their needs, they'd see me. They'd love me the way I loved them. But sitting at that intersection with my hazard lights blinking against the dark, a truth settled over me. Like ash, they didn't see my giving as love. They saw it as compliance. They didn't admire my generosity. They depended on it, counted on it, exploited it. Every check I wrote, the 40 grand I gave mom and dad to keep their mortgage afloat, the 20 grand I handed Ethan when his business failed, the countless smaller gifts, prescriptions, groceries, repairs, meals, takeout when they were too tired to cook, none of it was seen as kindness. It was seen as duty, as my role in their world, as what I owed them simply for existing as their daughter, their sister, their solution. I thought of Ethan's laugh, sharp and dismissive. She still thinks we're a real family. It's almost sad. My stomach twisted. I felt something inside me pull tight like a thread snapping under too much tension. The car around me blurred dashboard lights glowing soft blue and red against the darkness. I realized then that if I wrote them a check for $500,000, it wouldn't be a rescue. It would be a confirmation. Proof that their view of me was correct, that Anna would always pay. That Anna was nothing but a walking ATM with a beating heart attached. And they'd thank me, sure, with forced smiles and wet eyes. But beneath it would be contempt. Because no one truly respects the person they can manipulate into saving them from their own destruction. I pulled into an empty strip mall parking lot, the neon open 24 hours sign of a convenience store flickering overhead. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence roared in my ears. In that quiet clarity bloomed like ice across a window. Cold, beautiful in its finality. They didn't love me for me. They loved me for what I gave them. My worth in their eyes wasn't my laughter, my intelligence, my kindness, or the way I remembered everyone's birthdays without a Facebook notification. My worth was measured in the number of zeros I could write at the bottom of a check. I stared at my reflection in the dark window, hair coming loose from its bun, mascara smudged under tired eyes, lips chapped. I looked like a woman who gave until there was nothing left to give. And I realized that's exactly who I'd become. My phone buzzed with a new text. Mom again. Where are you, sweetie? Dinner's ready. We need to talk. I didn't open it. I didn't need to read her words to know what they'd say. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I thought about my apartment, the quiet sanctuary I'd carved out of this chaotic world, the chipped mugs lined up neatly in my kitchen, The thrifted bookshelf stuffed with novels, the windows that let in morning light, the lock on my door that turned with a satisfying click each night telling me I was safe, even if only from the outside world. I wouldn't lose that place. Not for Ethan, not for Dad, not even for Mom. Because sitting in that parked car with the lasagna cooling beside me, I understood something for the first time in my life. They would keep taking until there was nothing left. They would drain me dry and stand over the bones wondering why I wasn't smiling anymore. And I would keep letting them. Unless I chose differently, unless I finally stopped. The light above the convenience store flickered, humming its lonely song into the night. Moths battered themselves against the buzzing bulb, desperate for something that would burn them alive. I watched them for a moment, feeling strangely at peace, because I saw myself in their frantic dance, and I understood I wasn't going to be a moth anymore. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling back to life under my feet. Then I drove away, leaving the lasagna behind in the passenger seat, letting the dark swallow me whole. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time I knew exactly where I wasn't going back to them. I drove for hours that night, past sleeping suburbs with empty playgrounds and porch lights glowing like lonely beacons, past shuttered stores with metal grates pulled tight, fast food drive-thrus with flickering menus, gas stations where strangers filled their tanks under harsh fluorescent light. I drove until my body ached from sitting, until my mind quieted from its spinning, until all that was left was a raw, pulsing clarity. At some point, I pulled over by a darkened park. The lasagna dish sat on the passenger seat, cold now, the condensation pooling beneath the foil like tears no one bothered to wipe away. I rested my hand on top of it, feeling nothing but glass and chill. Earlier that evening, it had been heavy with warmth, with hope, with love I still believed was mutual. Now it was just a container of cheese and pasta, as empty of meaning as the people I had cooked it for. I closed my eyes and let my head fall back against the seat. Above me, the sky was dark and endless. I thought about the woman I had been only hours before, the one who showed up every Sunday, lasagna in hand, heart wide open, believing that being dependable was the same as being loved. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for them. Only a quiet exhaustion settling into my bones, the kind that said, enough, no more. When I finally turned the car back toward home, dawn was beginning to creep up along the horizon, staining the sky in pale pink and bruised lavender. I drove through streets still empty of morning traffic, past houses with lights turning on one by one as the world woke up to Monday. Back in my apartment, I set the lasagna on the kitchen counter without looking at it. My cat, Piper, wound around my ankles, meowing her soft morning greeting. I knelt down to press my forehead against hers, feeling her purr vibrate through her tiny body. She was the only creature in my life who never asked for more than I could give. I stood up and looked around my apartment. The sun was streaming in through the east-facing windows, catching on the glass jars lined along my kitchen shelf. I'd always loved mornings here. They felt honest, clean, like a chance to begin again. I didn't turn on my phone. I knew what waited there: missed calls, texts from Mom and Dad, and Ethan voicemails that would say my name like an accusation. I wasn't ready to hear them. Maybe I never would be. Instead, I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my bank accounts. One by one, I transferred every cent I had into new bank's accounts they didn't know existed. I called each customer service line, wading through the hold music with my chin propped on my hand, and froze every point of access they might have had. Then I changed every password, updated every two-factor authentication, reset every security question. Each confirmation email felt like a small brick being laid in the foundation of a fortress I should have built years ago. When it was done, I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. My shoulders trembled with adrenaline. Piper jumped into my lap, curling up with a content sigh. I buried my fingers in her soft fur and let myself breathe. I thought about driving back to their house, about knocking on the door, lasagna in hand, confronting them face to face, watching their expressions morph from relief to confusion to panic as I told them I knew everything. But no, that wasn't what I wanted. This wasn't about punishing them. This was about saving myself. I realized then that if I told them I knew, they would twist my words, cry, beg, manipulate. They would say it was my fault for listening at the door, that I misunderstood, that family helps family, that Ethan made a mistake but he didn't deserve prison, that I didn't have children or a husband, so what was I saving for anyway? I wouldn't give them that chance, so I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't drive back with their lasagna. I simply disappeared from their plans. That morning I made coffee and sat by the window watching the city wake up under streaks of gold and coral. I felt empty, but it wasn't a frightening emptiness. It was spacious, like a room finally cleared of clutter, like standing in silence after years of noise. And in that quiet, a single truth settled into me, heavy and certain I wasn't going back. Not today. Not ever. Because walking away wasn't giving up. It was remembering who I was before they taught me that love meant erasing myself. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my back in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling fan slicing shadows through the dim light of my apartment. Piper curled up in the crook of my arm, her purr rumbling soft against my ribs, the only sound in the dark. I replayed every word I'd overheard, each sentence echoing in my skull like a cruel lullaby. Anna won't be a problem. She never says no. She still thinks we're a real family. It's almost sad. I thought about my childhood, about how I was always the quiet one, the good girl, the helper. How I learned to sense moods before I even understood my own feelings. How I cleaned the kitchen without being asked because Mom seemed tired. How I let Ethan take the last cookie, the front seat, the TV remote because he's older. Let him have it. How Dad called me his little star when I got straight A's, but didn't come to my graduation because Ethan had a business pitch competition that day. I'd spent my entire life bending myself into shapes that fit their needs, believing that was what love looked like. Believing that if I just kept giving, kept sacrificing, they'd look at me the way I looked at them, with pride, with tenderness, with gratitude. But love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's consumption. At 2:00 a.m., I kicked off the covers and sat on the edge of my bed, feet planted on the cold hardwood floor. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything soft and left nothing but bone and echo. I walked to the bathroom and flicked on the light. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked familiar and foreign all at once. Her hair was mussed mascara smeared into half moons under red-rimmed eyes. But it was the expression that caught me, a look I'd never seen on my own face before. Steady, cold, done. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but there were no tears left. Only a quiet knowing blooming low in my belly. A truth I couldn't unhear. They were never going to choose me over their comfort. They were never going to protect me the way I protected them. They were never going to love me beyond what I could provide. I ran cold water over my hands, letting it drip down my wrists. The shock of it pulled me back into my body, into the present moment. My heart beat strong and even in my chest. I looked around my tiny bathroom, chipped subway tiles, steam-warped vanity towels that never quite matched. I loved this space. It was mine. Every scratch and stain and imperfection belonged to me alone. No one had ever bled me dry in this room. No one had ever looked at me here and seen an ATM with a pulse. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to safety. I padded barefoot back into the kitchen, flicking on the light. The lasagna dish sat on the counter where I'd left it, condensation pooled beneath its cooling glass. I pulled back the foil and stared at it, the browned mozzarella, the ribbons of pasta, the bright flecks of basil. So much care, so much time, so much hope layered between sauce and cheese, believing I was bringing them love, not just dinner. I pressed the foil back down and slid it into the fridge. Maybe I'd eat it tomorrow. Maybe I'd throw it out. I hadn't decided yet. Instead, I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into every bank account, every investment portal, every credit card. I changed passwords, set fraud alerts, rerouted two-factor authentications. I closed joint accounts they might still have access to. I transferred funds into new accounts they didn't know existed. I froze my credit. I checked my credit report for inquiries. I requested copies of every statement from the last 5 years. Each click felt like lighting a candle in the dark. Small glows of power flickering against the vast night of my ignorance. When I finished, I sat back in my chair. The sun was just beginning to rise beyond my windows, staining the sky in streaks of lavender and gold. Piper jumped onto my lap, curling her warm body against my stomach. I buried my fingers in her soft fur and felt a deep, exhausted exhale leave my lungs. That was the moment I understood I wasn't powerless. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't just someone they could drain dry without consequence. I was someone who could choose. And tonight I chose me. I didn't know what came next. Whether I'd confront them, cut them off, or disappear entirely. But for the first time in my life, the fear of losing them felt smaller than the fear of losing myself. Outside, the city stirred awake. Cars rumbled down streets slick with early morning dew. Shop lights flickered on. Joggers passed by my window, ponytails swinging, breath misting in the dawn air. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the world fill me. It was morning, a new day. And for the first time, it felt like mine. The next morning, I didn't make coffee. I made moves. I woke before my alarm, before the sun had fully clawed its way above the horizon. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, but underneath it pulsed something sharper, resolve. It was a strange feeling, both electric and quiet, like stepping onto ice and realizing it will hold your weight after all. I pulled on a sweatshirt and leggings, tied my hair up, and sat at my desk. Piper hopped onto the windowsill, curling into a small loaf as she watched the pigeons gather on the roof across from us. Outside, the city was still muted, and gray streetlights flickering against the dawn. I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, then I started. I logged into every single account I owned, checking savings, high-yield brokerage, retirement. Even that dusty old 401k from my first corporate job I'd never bothered to roll over. One by one, I transferred balances into new banks, credit unions with no shared branches, no old paperwork linking back to my childhood address or my parents' joint tax filings. I froze my credit, set up fraud alerts, changed passwords and security questions, activated two-factor authentication on every portal. I called customer service lines, waited on hold, confirmed my identity, asked questions I never thought to ask before. My voice was calm, steady, professional. The reps probably thought I was just another over-caffeinated millennial getting my financial life together before Q3. They had no idea I was building a fortress. I pulled up my credit report, scouring every line item for inquiries I didn't recognize. Requested mailed copies to keep in my records. Downloaded statements from the last 5 years, organized them into folders labeled by year, then by purpose: mortgage help. Ethan's business collapse. Mom's medical bills, birthday gifts, emergency repairs, family support. Each dollar tracked each transfer, documented each note in the margin, a tiny obituary for the version of me who thought giving without limits was love. By the time the sun rose high enough to pour gold across my desk, my coffee pot still sat cold and untouched. I didn't need caffeine. I was running on adrenaline, grief, and a bitter clarity that felt cleaner than any morning brew. My phone buzzed and buzzed, lighting up with missed calls. Mom, Dad, Ethan, over and over. I didn't answer. I let them roll to voicemail, to digital purgatory where their needs could not reach me. Finally, I drafted an email to my boss, Melissa Reynolds. Subject line, personal urgent. Melissa was the kind of woman who wore navy sheath dresses like armor and never raised her voice unless she wanted to cut someone in half. Sharp, respected, childless, by choice a legend in our division for surviving 2 hostile takeovers and an SEC investigation without a single sleepless night. At least that's what the whispers said. I knew if anyone would understand, it was her. When I walked into her office later that morning, she didn't look up from her laptop right away. "Close the door," she said, typing one last sentence before lifting her eyes to mine. Her gaze was steady, piercing, like she could see every crack in me and didn't flinch. "What's wrong?" she asked. 2 words. No softness, but no judgment either. I told her everything. My voice shook at first, but as I spoke, it evened out like my lungs were remembering how to work. I told her about overhearing Ethan's plan about the $500,000, about every check I'd written over the years, believing I was helping, believing that made me good, believing that goodness meant safety. I told her about last night, about the lasagna still sitting in my fridge like a gravestone for who I used to be. Melissa didn't interrupt once. She just listened, her expression growing darker by the paragraph until her fingers were steepled beneath her chin, and her eyes were narrowed in that calculating way I'd seen her use before shredding an unprepared VP in board meetings. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. First, she said, "You're handling this better than most people would. Second, you need a lawyer. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because they might try to twist it. Third, you need a record. Every dollar, every ask, every transfer." "I've started a spreadsheet," I whispered. I turned my laptop around to show her the document, 5 years of dates, amounts, reasons. Notes like Mom's hospital bill and Ethan's lease default. Melissa scrolled through it silently, then let out a low whistle. "That's nearly 200 grand before this new ask," she said. "Jesus, Anna." I didn't say anything. My throat felt tight. She looked at me for a long moment, then something softened in her gaze. "One more thing," she said. "We have an opening in our London office. Same title, better pay, but more importantly, an ocean between you and this mess. If you want it, it's yours. We'll handle the visa. The relocation, everything. London." The word echoed through me, hollow and bright all at once. I didn't answer. Not yet. But something inside me shifted, like the first crack of light seeping under a locked door. When I left her office, I walked down the hall with my spine straighter than it had been in years. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't check it. I had moves to make. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't making them for anyone else but me. I was sitting at my desk later that afternoon, organizing PDFs of my bank statements into folders, when my phone buzzed again. Ethan. For hours, I'd let every call go to voicemail, but something in me, curiosity, maybe spite, wanted to hear what he'd say, how he'd spin it. I let it ring once more, then answered, pressing the phone to my ear without saying hello. "Jesus, Anna." He breathed, his voice shaky, rushed, asking where the hell I'd been, telling me he'd been calling all day. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs calmly, and said flatly that I'd been working at that job he thought printed money. He went silent for a moment, then let out a forced, brittle laugh, saying we needed to talk as a family. I told him I couldn't, scanning an account summary as I spoke because I had plans. He snapped, demanding to know what plans were more important than family. I didn't hesitate as I told him the kind where people don't scheme to steal $500,000 from me. There was a stunned pause on the line, his breathing ragged and shallow as he realized I'd been listening. I reminded him softly that I was bringing lasagna that day, that foolish gesture I still believed meant something. He tried to deflect, saying it wasn't what I thought. I closed my laptop and asked if tax evasion, fraud, and now gambling debts were also not what I thought, wondering out loud how deep it all went. His breath hitched into silence. Then I whispered that he hadn't thought I'd find out about that, had he? He tried to recover his voice, rising with urgency, admitting he'd had a bad streak and insisting it was under control now. I almost laughed as I repeated his words, asking if that was why he owed a bookie $200,000 on top of the IRS breathing down his neck. He fell silent again before his voice dropped low, pleading. He said he just needed help. He needed his sister. Please. My jaw tightened as I pictured him pacing his expensive condo, the one Mom and Dad co-signed on, when he said he was finally getting his life together. I pictured the cards, the chips, the casino lights flashing across his manic smile as he told himself, just one more hand, just one more win. Quietly, I told him he planned it, coached them on how to lie to me, and laughed about it. He said he didn't mean to hurt me. I told him he didn't think about me at all. He let out a ragged breath and begged, saying if he didn't pay them back soon, it wasn't just jail, these people would come after him. I closed my eyes, exhaustion settling deep into my bones, and reminded him I'd given him everything I had, $40,000 to Mom and Dad, $20,000 to his failed business, thousands more, in the little ways he never even noticed. He pleaded again, saying this was different, that I was the only one who could fix it. But I opened my eyes to the gray afternoon light slanting across my desk and told him no, I was the only one who ever tried to fix it. And that was over now. His voice cracked as he said he could lose everything. I whispered that I already had my trust, my peace, my belief that he loved me as a person, not just as a resource. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence broken only by his sharp inhale like he was about to cry. Please, he whispered. Please, Anna. You're my sister. Tears pricked the backs of my eyes, but they didn't fall. My voice was quiet final as I told him he should have thought of that before he bet his life away. I hung up before he could answer. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. The silence of my apartment wrapped around me like armor. Almost immediately, texts began flooding in. Ethan, Mom, Dad, all variations of, call me, answer the phone, we need to talk, don't do this. I turned my phone over face down. Outside my window, the city carried on cars honking, delivery trucks rumbling down the street, a dog barking 2 floors below, life moving forward, indifferent, free. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger implies you still care enough to want them to change. What I felt was deeper, sharper, a cold clarity settling into every corner of my mind. For the first time, I felt what it meant to choose myself. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because it was the only choice left that didn't end with me empty. I stood and walked to my window, resting my forehead against the glass. Below, people hurried along the sidewalks, clutching coffees, bags, briefcases, living lives that didn't orbit around family secrets and debts disguised as duty. I closed my eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. Ethan would have to beg someone else now. I was done being the answer to problems I didn't create. Wednesday afternoon, I was leaving a budget meeting when my phone buzzed with a notification from reception. Anna, the receptionist, said, her voice a little strained. There's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother. My stomach clenched. I glanced at the glass walls lining the hallway, the polished concrete floors gleaming under the fluorescent lights. My office was my fortress, my last place untouched by their needs. I'll be right down, I said, though my voice felt detached like it belonged to someone else. I took the elevator to the lobby. As soon as the door slid open, I saw her, Veronica, my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair, usually so perfectly curled, hung limp around her shoulders. Her blouse was wrinkled, her eyes swollen and red. She clutched her purse to her chest like it was an anchor keeping her upright. The moment she saw me, her face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she rushed toward me, arms outstretched. "Anna," she gasped. "Please, please, just talk to me." People in the lobby turned to stare. Suits and pencil skirts, receptionists typing behind gleaming desks, security guards shifting uncomfortably. I stood there in my navy dress and low heels, feeling every gaze land on me like a brand. I didn't move. "We can talk," I said quietly. "Right here." She flinched at my tone, her arms dropping to her sides. "Anna, please, can't we go somewhere private? This isn't a conversation for strangers." My jaw tightened. "No, Mom. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." Her eyes darted around the lobby, desperate to escape the curious glances. Then she leaned closer, her voice breaking. "It's Ethan," she whispered. "He's in trouble. You know that. He told us everything. About the gambling debts, the IRS. He could go to prison, Anna. Real prison. Do you understand? I understand perfectly." I said, my voice cold and even. "He committed tax fraud. He racked up gambling debts he can't pay. Actions have consequences." Her hand flew to her mouth, muffling a sob. "How can you be so cold? This isn't like you. You're not this person. You've always been the good one, the helper, the steady one. Please don't do this to him." I felt something deep in my chest crack, but it wasn't guilt. It was grief. Grief for the girl who used to believe moments like this proved she mattered. I leaned closer, my voice low and calm. "You're right, Mom. The old me would have written the check already, because the old me thought love meant sacrifice. The old me believed you when you said family helps family." Her tears spilled faster. "Anna, we are family." "No," I said. "Family doesn't stand in the kitchen and plan how to drain their daughter dry. Family doesn't laugh about how gullible she is." Her eyes widened, glistening with horror. "You heard that?" I nodded. Every word, including when Ethan said, "I don't understand how the real world works." When Dad said, "Crying always gets me to say yes." When Ethan called me naive for thinking lasagna meant love. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Her fingers curled around empty air before falling to her side, trembling. "We were desperate," she whispered. "You don't understand," they threatened him. "No," I said softly. "You don't understand. This wasn't desperation. This was greed. There's a difference. Please," she sobbed louder now. People were definitely staring. "Anna, he's your brother. I know we've asked a lot. I know it hasn't been fair, but this is prison. He'll lose everything. Please, please, sweetie." My chest felt tight. My throat burned, but my voice stayed steady. "He already lost me," I said. "You all did." She shook her head frantically. "No, no, don't say that. Don't say that." I stepped back further. "You said I wouldn't say no. You said crying always worked. Well, it doesn't anymore." She pressed her hand to her mouth again to stifle another sob. Her shoulders shook with the force of it. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her for a long moment, taking in her grief, her guilt, her desperation, and I realized it wasn't mine to carry. It never was. "I know you're sorry," I said quietly, "but you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry I found out." Her tears froze. She looked at me, silent, defeated. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and turned to leave. As I walked away, her voice followed me, ragged and broken. "Anna, please, we need you." I didn't turn back, because for the first time in my life, I understood needing me and loving me were never the same thing. Thursday passed in silence. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. For a brief moment, I let myself believe maybe it was over. Maybe they'd finally understood. Maybe they were ashamed enough to leave me alone. Friday afternoon, I was packing up my desk when the receptionist buzzed me. "Anna," she said, her voice careful, neutral. "There's someone from legal downstairs, a process server, says he has documents for you." My heart thudded once hard before settling into a dull, resigned ache. I exhaled slowly. "Send him up." A man in a cheap gray suit appeared minutes later holding a thick manila envelope. He didn't meet my eyes as he handed it over. "You've been served," he muttered before turning and walking out, leaving the faint smell of stale coffee and cologne in his wake. I sat back down at my desk, staring at the envelope in my hands. My fingers felt numb. I tore it open and pulled out the papers inside, a formal complaint, filed by my parents. I skimmed the lines, the words blurring, then sharpening in sickening waves. They were suing me, claiming the money I'd given them over the years were loans, that I was now demanding repayment with interest, and by cutting off contact, I'd caused them severe emotional distress and financial instability. They wanted damages. They wanted legal fees. They wanted punitive compensation for breach of familial trust. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, not sharp or bitter hollow. The kind of laugh that spills out when disbelief finally gives up and lets exhaustion take over. I pressed my hand to my mouth to smother the sound as tears burned behind my eyes. They weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were trying to punish me, to make an example of me for daring to say no. My phone buzzed on my desk. An email notification. I swiped it open with shaking hands. Subject: urgent referral. It was from Melissa. She'd CC'd an attorney. "Anna, meet Carol Kim. Highly recommend. Call her immediately." I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. Carol answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and calm. "Send me everything," she said. 10 minutes later, after I'd scanned and emailed every page, she called back. "They have no case," she said. "No contracts, no documentation, no written agreements of repayment. Nothing. This is textbook harassment and intimidation." "Can we counter?" I asked quietly, my voice tight. "We could," she said. "Sue for damages, emotional distress, defamation, financial exploitation. We could destroy them if that's what you want." I closed my eyes. The idea tasted bitter on my tongue. "No," I whispered. "I don't want their money. I just want them gone." There was a long pause on the line. Then Carol's voice softened. "Understood," she said. "I'll handle everything. You focus on protecting yourself." After I hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the city skyline beyond my office window. The sun was setting, bleeding orange and pink across the glass towers. The streets below glowed with headlights and taillights, people going home to families who didn't sue them for saying no. I slipped the legal documents back into the envelope, locked it in my bottom drawer, and pressed my palms flat against the cool wood of my desk. My hands were still shaking, but underneath the tremor was something steadier, harder. The beginnings of a spine forged in betrayal. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late at work running numbers twice, 3 times to make sure every cent lined up. All the mornings I'd woken at dawn to get in an extra hour of prep before presentations. All the promotions I'd earned, every raise, every glowing review, thinking each one would finally make them proud, finally make them see me as enough. And here I was, being sued for my success, for my refusal to let them bleed me out any further. A single tear slipped down my cheek, hot and silent. I wiped it away before it could fall. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I wasn't sad either. I felt clean, like a wound cauterized. Painful, yes, but closed. They wanted to punish me for saving myself, but all they really did was prove that walking away was the only choice I ever had. That weekend I started packing, not just for London, but for a life I'd never imagined myself brave enough to live. A life without them. I boxed up my books first. the dog-eared novels with underlined sentences that felt like prayers, the leadership guides with neon page flags I'd clung to through late nights at the office, believing strategy could save me from loneliness, the poetry collections I'd read on quiet Sunday mornings while lasagna bubbled in the oven, thinking if I kept layering cheese and sauce and hope, one day they'd taste it and call it love. Each book went into cardboard boxes labeled with thick black marker, "Keep. Mine." Next came my kitchen things, plates I'd thrifted in my 20s, mugs from conferences I'd attended wearing blazers a size too big, trying to look older, more capable. The heavy Dutch oven I'd splurged on after my first big promotion, promising myself I'd host dinner parties like the women in magazines. I wrapped each in newspaper, stacking them carefully like small monuments to the woman I'd become despite everything they'd drained from me. I left most of the photos behind. The framed Christmas shots where I stood smiling arms around people who were already planning how to ask for more. The faded print of Ethan at his wedding, his arms slung over my shoulders while he beamed at the camera. The cookbooks with Mom's notes in the margins, add garlic powder here. Veronica hates bland pasta. I put them back on the shelf, shut the cupboard door, and felt nothing. By Tuesday, the movers had come and gone. My apartment echoed with emptiness, each footstep ringing off bare floors. I left a note taped to the door with my forwarding address in London just in case. Not for them, for me, because I wasn't hiding anymore. That night I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, sipping chamomile tea from the one mug I hadn't packed. Piper curled up in my lap, purring softly as I scratched behind her ears. The city hummed beyond my windows, sirens, laughter buses sighing as they stopped at the curb. For the first time in years, I felt calm. Not happy exactly, but calm, like a battlefield after the last body has been carried away. Quiet, devastated, but ready for seeds to be planted again. My phone buzzed one last time before my flight. A text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. "Anna, I'm sorry, not for needing help, but for how we planned to get it. You deserved better. I hope someday you can forgive us." I read it twice then, a third time, waiting for the pain to come. It didn't. I felt nothing but a deep, echoing fatigue. The kind that seeps into your marrow after carrying a weight too heavy for too long. I typed back, "I hope someday you can deserve forgiveness." Then I turned off my phone, tucked it into my bag, and walked to my gate. At Heathrow, the air felt different, damp, brisk, scented with jet fuel and the promise of anonymity. I stepped onto the tube, my 2 suitcases at my feet, and watched my reflection flicker across the dark tunnel walls. A woman in a black wool coat hair pulled into a low bun, eyes tired but steady. A woman no one here knew. A woman who owed no one anything. 6 months later, the email came from Carol, my lawyer. Ethan was sentenced, 18 months federal prison. Tax evasion, wire fraud, gambling, related money laundering. Your parents settled their lawsuit for dismissal after the judge threatened sanctions for harassment. I read it at my new desk in our London office, the late afternoon light pooling gold across my laptop keys. Beyond the window, the Thames rolled by under a slate gray sky. Double-decker buses crawled over the bridge. A violinist played below on the pavement, his music threading through the hum of traffic and footsteps. I closed my laptop and rested my hands in my lap. My chest rose and fell, slow and even. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt clean, like a wound finally closed, leaving only a pale scar to remind me where it had been. My new apartment was small but warm, with exposed brick walls and iron-framed windows that let in every flicker of dawn. On Sunday mornings, I still made lasagna. Just for me. Extra cheese, no ricotta. I'd sit at the small bistro table by the window with Piper curled at my feet, and I'd eat slowly, savoring every bite. Not because I missed them, But because I remembered the girl, I'd been the one who thought showing up with food meant showing up with love. The girl who believed a sacrifice would earn her safety. The girl who carried her heart in a casserole dish and left it at their doorstep again and again, praying one day they'd hand it back whole. She was gone now. In her place stood someone different. Someone who knew that love without respect is just debt in disguise. Someone who understood that walking away wasn't giving up. It was remembering who you are. Sometimes I still thought about them. Ethan's cocky grin, Dad's quiet, dismissive sighs, Mom's trembling hands as she reached for mine in the lobby, tears streaking her makeup. But they felt like characters in a story I'd read long ago, their endings already written, unchangeable. On those mornings, watching the river drift by, I'd whisper to myself the words that had saved me. They never loved you for your lasagna, Anna. They loved you for your compliance. And you love yourself enough now to never let that happen again. Because some people only love you as long as you're useful. The moment you stop giving, you stop existing. I didn't leave to punish them. I left to protect what was left of me. And sometimes the only person who ever really shows up for you is you. I used to think showing up was enough. That if I kept saying yes, kept giving, kept making casseroles and covering bills, eventually they'd see me not just what I could offer. But I was wrong. Some people only know how to take. And when you finally walk away, they don't mourn losing you. They mourn losing their supply. I didn't cry for them anymore. I didn't pray for them either. I just pressed my mug to my lips, felt the steam rise to warm my face, and let the quiet settle in my bones like peace. Because this was my life now. Small, quiet, earned, free. And for the first time in 33 years, that was enough. Some people only love you when you're useful. The moment you stop giving, you stop existing in their world. This story isn't just about family betrayal. It's about the cost of kindness when you don't set boundaries. It's about learning that love without respect is just debt in disguise. Walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you'll ever do, choosing to protect what's left of yourself instead of letting them drain you dry. If you've ever stood outside a door with something warm in your hands and hope in your chest only to hear a truth that broke, you know this. You don't owe anyone your life just because they call themselves family. Sometimes the only person who ever really shows up for you is you.